Well, ladies and gentlemen, actually a very interesting day in politics in South Africa. But before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. And if you'd really like to watch videos that I make that are only available to the members, you'll have to join the channel as a member. Anyway, let's get straight on to the news. The first news article, and this actually is an open letter to Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC's NEC. Now, the letter itself was written by an academic from, well, a KZN university. Now, the author expressed his frustration and says that he wishes to speak directly to the ANC, NEC, and President Cyril Ramaphosa, but notes ANC hostility towards dissent. And he uses the remarks of how, in the Zuma era, they said, well, anybody who dissents from ANC ideas is a clever black. And he says that really the ANC has little to no power left and is at the door on the way out. So he says that they might not listen to him because he's a clever black, but he says he's going to say to the ANC exactly what he thinks of them and exactly where he feels the ANC currently is. So he says that the ANC's NEC is likened to a mafia gathering. He says that collectively they've all been accused of thievery, corruption, drug smuggling, and even murder cover-ups. And he highlights numerous scandals such as Travelgate, the arms deals, state capture, Pala, and so forth. He criticizes the ANC for still talking in revolutionary tongues and blaming apartheid for all of its failures. And he says that this mindset itself has set black South Africans back by 100 years in terms of their own development. He says that actually if you look at governance collapse in the country, he says that the homeland states under apartheid perform better than many of today's municipalities. And he gives numerous examples of that, where he says that most towns outside of the Western Cape are now marked by dereliction. He says that there's sewage running in the streets, there's potholes, and there's poverty. And he says this is all thanks to the ANC. He says that the ANC leadership has been accused of making blacks appear as incompetent thieves and reinforcing apartheid-era stereotypes. And he says that you can basically quote P.W. Botha here and what he said about blacks during the apartheid era. And he says that the ANC has basically made those words basically seem true. He says that South Africans now face suspicion abroad, and as a result of ANC policy, many South Africans are now being lumped in with the Nigerian drug trade smugglers, or the idea that when you get their email from somebody, the Nigerian prince, well, he says South Africans now look the same way, thanks to the ANC. He says that the ANC are on a precipice of an electoral decline, and he says that he predicts that in the next local government elections, the ANC will be a minority across the municipalities. He notes that leaders are chosen for loyalty, singing and dancing, and not for merit or incompetence. And he says, will the ANC ever protect honest people like whistleblowers? He asks the question. He says, where is the competency in the ANC? He further goes on to say that what the ANC have done is damage democracy, specifically with all their commissions. He says the public is losing faith in democracy as thugs kill each other over tenders and posts. He says that Zondo himself says that he was shocked at the swearing in of ministers who he knew personally had been implicated in state capture. He says that the police commissioner himself admits corruption is ignored at the top level, and that all these commissions of inquiry are seen as convenient alternatives to accountability and are often used to delay action. He says that South Africa was once a beacon of hope in Africa, attracting skilled professionals. Now only illegal miners, drug dealers, and hitmen enter the country due to a porous and bribery-ridden border. He says that Ramaphosa pledges clean governance, smart cities, revived SOEs like PRASA and Denel and Transnet and whoever else. And he says none of these ever actually materialize. And we know this. I mean, the smart cities that we get promised every year, the SONA, well, don't know where they are. He says that youth unemployment is now above 62% and describes it as a moral crisis. He questions the fate of the trillions looted from the arms deals, the state capture, the 500 billion COVID stimulus, and accuses the ANC of feasting on people's fear of death during the pandemic. And he asks the questions, will any of these individuals ever see orange overalls? He says the ANC's NEC allegedly boasts about new luxury cars, Camps Bay mansions, and Panama properties, and he notes that even ANC leaders avoid investing in their own hometowns due to crime and poor service delivery. Now, this is allusion to, well, the fact that most of the ANC's top brass live in Cape Town, or the Western Cape, so basically territories run by the DA. He says that South Africans are peaceful, they're used to hardship, and this has prevented uprising, coups, and civil wars. He says the ANC is accused of using social grants as a zombification tool to numb people's anger. He warns that this stability is temporary, and he asks the question, for how long until people turn on the state and we do have anarchy? And to be honest, we've already seen that. We saw that in the July riots in 2021. And so he says that the government, the ANC and Cyril Ramaphosa, must stop hiding behind commissions. They must jail corrupt ministers directly, declare corruption as a national disaster, sacrifice senior leaders to restore hope, and urges investment in youth, take kids out of the drug-ridden townships, and put them in a professional military to give them skills, discipline, and hope. And he warns that without this, simmering tensions will explode into nationwide chaos. And a very interesting piece. And ladies and gentlemen, I've covered all of this because it really was worthwhile reading. And so I would say to you, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think of this open letter? Do let me know in the comments section below. So let's move swiftly on. And this is the news that Cyril Ramaphosa has green-lit a state bank. Now, according to Cyril, during his questions, he said that a state bank will be created to extend banking and credit to rural communities, informal traders, and small businesses which are often locked out of the financial system. Now, a question is currently whether Africa Bank and Postbank will be merged into this new state bank. Now, Postbank is currently still without a full banking license and is being considered as a foundation, but Africa Bank could also be merged in, with Ramaphosa stressing that the state will utilize all its assets to make this happen. Now, Africa Bank's ownership structure complicates things because the SARB owns 50% of it, the government has some shares in it, but there are obviously some minority shareholders, which include First Rand, Standard Bank, Absa, Nedbank, Investec, and Capitec. The Reserve Bank has wanted to sell its stake in the bank for 50% stake since 2021, but so far they haven't. Now, Postbank has a large number of governance issues, and the SARB has served 4 variation notices since 2022, demanding upgrades to its IT and security systems to keep Postbank in the national payment system. Without improvements, Postbank risks exclusion. Now, the interesting part about all this is that we've seen a national bank before, and it was VBS. And as you know, VBS's lending criteria was so flippant that they gave out a large number of unsecured loans to people that should never have been given loans. And the net result of that was they collapsed the bank. Now, it should already raise alarm bells with the inclusion of the Postbank, specifically because of its own governance issues. So one has to ask the question, how long is this all going to last before the new state bank is, well, completely looted dry? Now, let's move then swiftly on, and this is the trade tariffs with Donald Trump. Now, as you know, South Africa has already been hit with the 30% trade tariffs effective the 7th of August. Now, we already know what's been hit, but you know, other countries have already faced similar hikes, with Switzerland having its tariffs raised by 39%, Canada 35%, while Lesotho's tariffs were actually cut down to 15% in April, which highlights inconsistency in Trump's tariff strategy. Now, the entire thing was all raised as a question to Ramaphosa in Parliament, specifically by Julius Malema. And actually, if you look at a lot of the questioning that occurred between Ramaphosa and the ministers in Parliament, it was basically Malema. In any case, Ramaphosa answered Malema in Parliament around these tariffs and said that South Africa would not go on bended knees to the United States, and insisted that SA still had leverage via its natural resources, minerals, and investment appeal. I don't know what investment appeal he thinks we have here, and with many of the mines closing, I'm not really sure what this natural leverage is, but he says he won't go on bended knees just begging the US for a trade deal. He says South Africa is still negotiating in Washington and New York, and Ramaphosa promised the appointment of a new US ambassador soon, and we've all heard that one before. In fact, we've been hearing it for months. He's applying his mind to it. Just somebody found him a pen. We've all heard these stories before. He says that it will be someone experienced in world politics and markets. Yeah, well, who? Like Jonas? Like that guy? Come on, man. We wouldn't trust you to appoint a cleaner in a dump, because I don't imagine they didn't even know what they're doing there. But in any case, an analyst has suggested that South Africa's biggest diplomatic nemesis is actually Marco Rubio, who is described by this individual as the US Secretary of State as being the most dangerous diplomatic threat South Africa has faced in decades. Now, the reason for this is that Marco Rubio has simultaneously holds two posts. He's the Secretary of State and the acting National Security Advisor. And this is what makes him the most powerful foreign policy figure since, well, pretty much ever. Now, Rubio, a Cuban-American hardliner, has built his career on being anti-communist and anti-Cuba. And he extends this hostility to South Africa due to his ties with Cuba, Venezuela, China, and Iran, and by extension, the ANC's tripartite alliance in the South African Communist Party. Now, he has become a champion of what's classed by this individual as the white genocide in South Africa narrative, which he says is false. And he says it's highly influential in the US right-wing politics, and that his boycott of the G20 foreign ministers meeting hosted in South Africa was framed around this lie. So he says that Marco Rubio didn't come here because he says that there's white genocide in South Africa, and that's the reason he didn't come. Now, this analyst warns that Rubio's alignments with Elon Musk, the vice president, J.D. Vance, and the billionaire Peter Thiel, who spent part of his life in apartheid-era South Africa and Namibia, he says entrenches the hostility to South Africa. He says Rubio is closely tied to the Cuban-American National Foundation and emulates the Israeli lobby model of influence over Congress. This combination, this analyst argues, makes him particularly effective at mobilizing US political pressure against South Africa. Now, the whole point of what this analyst is arguing is that he suggests that South Africa faces a formidable ideological-driven opponent. He says that the only way to stamp this agenda out is by, well, applying their own pressure and strategic reach to the US. But you see, a lot of this is complete bullshit because, as I've said before, what you seem to find in the South African political arena and even in the media arena with many of these analysts is that they're just trying to somehow get their head around how all of the bad habits that they've done for years are suddenly chickens coming home to roost. I mean, it's like they've been doing all these things for years and now suddenly they're caught out for it and everybody's like, we let you get on with this for a long time, but now we're not going to let you anymore. And they're all like, we don't understand what happened. Must be Marco Rubio. It must be, I don't know, Donald Trump. It must be Elon Musk. It couldn't possibly be the stupid, dumbass things that these individuals do. Because moving on, and this is the news around the SANDF chief general who traveled to Tehran and met with the Iranian army commanders and pledged solidarity. Now, you will recall, this caused a bit of an international kerfuffle, with Ramaphosa saying he knew nothing about it. He was shocked. And anyway, Iranian media reported how he had praised South Africa and Iran's common struggle against colonial aggression. Now, that visit was branded as being ill-timed and ill-advised, sparking backlash in South Africa's parliament and concern internationally, specifically from the US, given its hostility to Iran. So the US actually said, we've seen this, and what's this all about? And South Africa was like, we don't know. Well, the defense minister, Angie, didn't really want to just be like, no, we don't know. She was like, no, it's all fine. She said that he did nothing wrong. And yeah, she just put her foot right into it. And this called for her dismissal. Many individuals said that she was no longer fit for office. She had zero understanding how her big mouth could get South Africa into trouble with its allies or its trade partners. And in a typical fashion, well, Ramaphosa did nothing because that's pretty much what Ramaphosa does. He always does nothing. Now, this whole palaver was raised as a question to Ramaphosa, who said, well, there is no military operation with Iran, and the visit was a predetermined trip, was planned nearly 2 years ago. Now, this is echoing what the defense minister said. He says that the comments made were merely an expression of continued relations And South Africa engages Iran with BRICS structures alongside China, Russia, Brazil, Egypt, and others. But that's not true, though, is it, Ramaphosa? Because he didn't just say, well, continued relations. He openly talked out about what he classed as colonial aggression and how all of these countries who had committed atrocities against Iran, specifically after the US had bombed it, were all just terrible and, these bullies. Everybody knew exactly what was going on. And so your suggestion that it was an expression of continued relations is just, well, bullshit, isn't it? Now, everybody knows the timing was unfortunate, but Ramaphosa insisted that South Africa's sovereignty means it can maintain ties with Iran while still engaging the US and Western powers. And again, that's not the issue. The reality is you keep claiming to be non-aligned, but then your very actions show that, well, you're aligned. That's the point. Nobody has a problem with a Switzerland model if it's true non-aligned, but it's not. You can't say, well, we're not aligned with China and Russia. Let's go do some military exercises with them. We love the US. We're not doing military exercises with them. We love China and Russia because they hate the West. Wait, we really want to trade with the US, but we're going to make it impossible. You don't have to say the silent part out loud for us all to know what's going on. Your own rhetoric is telling us you do not like your Western US partners. And now that you've been called out on your geopolitical bullshit, the balancing act that you think you have, you're trying to hoodwink us. You're trying to go, no, it's just BRICS. Yeah, what a load of crap. Everybody knows exactly what's going on. And in case, ladies and gentlemen, that's the news of today. I really don't have a lot more to say. So let me know what you think of these news articles in the comment section below. And until tomorrow, bye.